The radio crackled twice and then went dead. That's the thing nobody tells you about war. It's not the explosions that stay with you. It's the silence right after. That particular silence, the kind that fills your ears like water, the kind that means something has gone very, very wrong. Staff Sergeant Darius Cole pressed his back against a crumbling wall and looked at the 6 men around him. Dust on their faces, eyes wide, breath coming hard. He looked at the doorway, where Petty Officer Second Class Reyes had been standing 40 seconds ago. She wasn't there anymore. Let me back up, because if you don't understand how they got to Al-Qasr, you won't understand what happened next. And what happened next is the kind of thing that changes men, breaks some of them, rebuilds the rare few into something harder and quieter and permanently different. It was a Thursday. That detail always strikes people as strange when I tell the story, that such a thing happened on a Thursday, like Thursdays are supposed to be ordinary. The team had been inserted via helo at 200 hours into the Hadar corridor, about 11 kilometers northeast of the Syrian border. The mission brief was straightforward. Extract a source, get in, get out, wheels up by 4:30. Simple. The word simple, in that part of the world at that hour of night, is the universe setting you up. There were 7 of them on the ground. 6 SEALs, Cole, Hutchins, Breckett, Torres, Mwangi, and a guy everyone called Digger whose real name nobody used anymore, and 1 attached specialist. Sorry. Petty Officer Second Class Valentina Reyes, 26 years old, 5'4", from Laredo, Texas, which she would remind you of approximately never because she didn't need to remind anyone of anything. She had a way of occupying space that made people stop mid-sentence and recalibrate. Not because of the way she looked, though she was striking in the way that makes men say stupid things and then immediately regret them, but because of the stillness. She carried stillness like a weapon. Like she'd trained it the same way she'd trained everything else. She was a specialist sniper, one of the first women to complete the relevant qualifications, which she also never brought up because she didn't bring things up. She performed them. Cole had worked with her once before, 18 months prior, in a completely different theater. He trusted her the way you trust a good knife, not warmly, not emotionally, but absolutely. You don't feel affection for a knife. You know it will do what it's meant to do. That's better than affection. The rest of the team had not worked with her before. That mattered. Al-Qasr was what the maps called it. The palace. There had been a palace there once, in some century that predated electricity and arguments about borders. Now it was a dense knot of half-standing structures, narrow passages, collapsed roof lines, and what used to be a market square that was now just an open wound in the earth where the pavement had buckled from something large and indiscriminate. Beautiful, in the way that total destruction can be beautiful at 3 in the morning, when the moon is doing something strange above the dust. They moved in 2 elements. Reyes had taken position on a rooftop above the extraction point before the rest of the team moved in, standard setup. She had eyes on the whole approach, and her voice in their earpieces was the calmest thing in the operation. Approach is clean, 2 packs at the north wall stationary, they're not yours. Hutchins, who was new to working with her, had whispered to Cole, "How does she know they're not ours?" "Because she knows," Cole had said. She knew. They made the pickup. The source, a middle-aged man with the frightened eyes of someone who has been living with a secret for too long, was in the designated building, and for approximately 4 minutes, the whole thing looked like it was going to go exactly the way the brief said it would. Then the secondary element hit. Not from the north. From below, a sub-street tunnel the intelligence hadn't flagged, which meant either the intelligence was old or someone had talked, and at that point the distinction stopped mattering. 5, maybe 6 armed men coming up from a grate in the market square floor, and the sound of the firefight breaking out was the sound of everything simple becoming catastrophic. Cole's team moved, hard and fast and without discussion, because that's what training is, the elimination of the need for discussion. They folded the source between them and ran a deliberate withdrawal pattern toward the secondary exfil point, which was a narrow vehicle track about 400 meters east. Reyes held her position. That was her job. Hold position, maintain overwatch, cover the withdrawal. She was doing her job. Here is where I need you to pay attention, because what happened next is the thing that men in that unit still don't talk about cleanly. They talk around it. They talk about the firefight, the exfil, the secondary contact. They talk about the source's condition, about the hello, about the debrief. They don't talk about the decision. Cole made the call at the 400-meter mark. He had the source. He had 5 of his 6 men. He had multiple pursuers closing from the west, a blown exfil window, and a hello that had a hard limit of 3 additional minutes on station before fuel math made the decision for everyone. He keyed his radio. Raise status. Static. Raise. More static. Then faint, so faint that Hutchins, standing 2 feet away, would later say he hadn't heard it at all. Pinned. East face, I've got, and then nothing. Cole looked at Digger. Digger looked at the source. The source looked at nobody, because he had the eyes of a man who has already accepted that he is going to die and is mildly surprised each additional moment that he hasn't. We can't go back in, Torres said. Not cruelly, just factually. The way you say something that is true and terrible and cannot be made into anything other than what it is. Cole said nothing for 4 seconds. 4 seconds is a long time. Move, he said. They moved. Mwangi threw up when they reached the vehicle. Just quietly stepped to the side and did it, and nobody said anything because what was there to say? The hello came in 60 seconds later, hot and loud, and they loaded the source and themselves, and it lifted and banked east, and the ruins of Alcasar fell away below them. Hutchins stared out the open side. She might have already exfiltrated on her own, he said, to no one in particular, in the voice of a man trying to hand himself something he doesn't fully believe. She's good enough. Nobody answered him. Cole sat against the bulkhead with his rifle across his knees, and his hands very still, and his face doing nothing at all. Digger, who was the oldest man on the team, and had the kind of face that had heard everything and was surprised by none of it, leaned over until his shoulder touched Cole's shoulder. He didn't say anything. Cole didn't look at him. That was the whole conversation. The debrief happened at 800, and it was exactly as brutal as debriefs are when they're about something real. The source was intact. The intelligence he carried was intact. The mission, on paper, was a success. On paper. The officer running the debrief used the phrase acceptable operational loss, once and only once. Cole looked at him when he said it. Just looked. The officer didn't use the phrase again. Reyes was listed as MIA, missing in action, pending confirmation. Her file was flagged. Satellite imagery was tasked. A QRF, quick reaction force, was put on standby, which everyone in the room understood was a formality because Alcasar was now swarming, and sending anyone back in during daylight was not a QRF mission. It was a body recovery. If there was a body to recover. Nobody said that either. But everyone thought it. 31 hours passed. Cole sat in the staging area and did not sleep. He ate something at some point because Mwangi put food in front of him, and Mwangi had a way of making requests that weren't technically requests. He cleaned his rifle. He cleaned it again. He looked at the satellite imagery 3 times and found nothing useful, because satellite imagery of a bombed-out ancient market district tells you nothing except that things are ruined, which you already knew. Torres tried to talk to him at hour 18, and Cole said, "Not right now." And Torres, who was a good man, said okay and left. Digger didn't try to talk. He sat nearby. That was enough. That was Digger's whole skill, the ability to be present without being intrusive, which is rarer than marksmanship and harder to teach. Hutchins paced. Hutchins had the particular guilt of the person who had most recently failed to advocate loudly enough. He knew it. Everyone knew he knew it. He paced the length of the staging area, 12 steps one way, 12 steps back, until Cole told him quietly to please stop, and he stopped and stood against the wall with his arms folded and stared at the floor. The radio stayed silent. Hour 31. Then it didn't. It came in on the emergency frequency. Short, flat, no code names, no protocol, which immediately told everyone listening that she'd been compromised on gear and was working with whatever she had. This is Rays. I have 6 with me, all walking, request exfil, grid follows. Cole was across the room before she finished the sentence. 6. 6 with me. He grabbed the radio operator's shoulder, not hard, but firmly, the way you grab something to make sure it's real. Say again how many packs. A pause, then her voice again, and there was something in it, not exhaustion, not emotion, something more like a person who has been holding a very heavy thing for a very long time and has just now put it down. 6, all SEALs, 3rd platoon element. They were already in the ruins when I found them, been there 36 hours. Cole pressed the radio against his forehead for exactly 1 second. 3rd platoon, a separate operation, a separate insertion, a completely separate chain of events. Another team had gone into Al-Qasr for their own reasons and had been cut off from their own exfil in the chaos that had followed Cole's team's firefight. Rays hadn't just survived. She'd found them. She'd been operating alone, injured, they'd learned the details later, the graze on her left side, the dislocated shoulder. She'd set herself against a wall sometime before dawn, and she had found 6 stranded men in 3 kilometers of bombed-out ruins. And she'd kept them alive. And she'd brought them home. Cole didn't say anything for a long time after the transmission ended. Digger, standing 2 feet away, watched him. Grid's coming in, the radio operator said. QRF can be wheels up in 4 minutes. I'm going, Cole said. Cole. I'm going. Nobody argued. They went. The QRF helo came in low and fast, skimming rooftops the color of old teeth, and Cole sat at the open door with his boots on the skid and the wind hitting his face and thought about exactly nothing. That's a skill, thinking about exactly nothing. Most people believe they can do it, and almost none of them can. Cole had learned it somewhere between his 2nd deployment and his 3rd, in the particular school that has no name and issues no certificates, just takes things from you and leaves a quiet space where those things used to be. Right now the quiet space was useful. Right now he needed his hands to be steady and his eyes to be clear, and his mind to be a clean, empty room. He'd have feelings later. The grid rays had transmitted put her approximately 800 meters north of their original exfil point, deep in what the aerial imagery called Sector 7, which was a grid square that looked, from altitude, like someone had taken a city and crumpled it slowly. Pre-war it had been a residential district. Craftsmen, the briefing note said. Potters and weavers and metal workers, the kind of people who built things with their hands and were known for it, who had existed there for 300 years before the kind of men who ruined things arrived and ruined it. The helo couldn't land. Too much rubble, too many vertical obstructions, and the open patches were too small for a clean set-down. They fast-roped in Cole first, then Mwangi, Tors, Digger, 2 men from the QRF element, and hit the ground in a fractured courtyard that had once been someone's home. Pottery shards underfoot, Cole noticed, filed it away, moved. They found her position by sound first. A whistle, 3 short, 1 long. The old signal, the kind that predated the tech that you used when you had nothing left but your mouth and your memory. Cole answered it, 1 long, 2 short. Then silence. Then footsteps. She came through a gap in the east wall, moving at a pace that was deliberately measured, not fast, because fast would show urgency, and urgency would show fear. And Valentina Reyes did not show fear, not even when she'd had every reason to, not even when she was doing it anyway. And she had 6 men behind her, 6 actual human beings who were moving with the careful economy of people who have learned in the last 36 hours to spend every calorie deliberately. Cole saw her face. She had a gash above her left eye, dried to a dark line, dust in her hair, her lashes, the creases of her knuckles. Her left arm was held at a slight, controlled angle that told him about the shoulder before she said a word. She was wearing someone else's jacket, too big, dark blue, civilian, over her tactical rig, which meant at some point she'd had to look like someone else. She stopped 3 feet away from him. Looked at him. "You're late," she said. Cole opened his mouth. Closed it. "Yeah," he said. That was the whole reunion. The 6 SEALs behind her were 3rd Platoon, Alpha Element. Call sign Kestrel. They had been inserted 2 nights prior for a separate high-value target operation that had gone sideways within the first hour. Different direction, different causes, same result. Cut off, communications jammed, unable to exfil, going dark and staying dark and trying to wait it out in a city that was actively trying to kill them. Their team leader was a lieutenant named Sarkowski. Good face, calm bearing, the kind of man who had clearly been raised to keep it together in front of his people, and who had been doing exactly that for 36 hours, and who was now at the very bottom of whatever reserves that kind of upbringing gives you. He found Cole immediately. "Your operator found us at hour 4, he said. "She was already hurt when she came through the wall. I told her she could shelter with us and wait for extraction." Cole looked at Reyes. Reyes was talking to Mwangi about something, not about the shoulder, about the ammo count. She had done an inventory of the combined group's ammunition at some point, and she was telling Mwangi the numbers and they were both nodding. "She told you no," Cole said. "She told me," Sarkowski said, "that sheltering and waiting was not the same as getting out, and that she had a problem with the distinction." He paused. "Then she spent 6 hours scouting the perimeter and came back with a map." "A map?" She drew it, on the inside of a food wrapper, pencil she pulled from somewhere. Complete movement patterns of the patrol elements, timing intervals, 3 potential exfil corridors rated by risk, and a notation of which local structure was intermittently occupied and which wasn't. He stopped. "I've been doing this for 11 years. He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. Here is what Reyes had done, in the 31 hours between being left behind and making contact. She had moved off her compromised position within the first 12 minutes, before the secondary sweep came through, and that timing, 12 minutes, was the difference between everything and nothing, and it was the product of having thought about exactly this kind of scenario before it happened, and having a very precise idea of how long a sweep takes to mobilize. She had treated her own wound. The graze on her left side was real and ugly but not critical, and she had materials in her kit for exactly this contingency, and she had done it fast and in the dark and moved on. The shoulder she had dislocated in the initial withdrawal, catching herself on a drop that went 4 feet farther than she'd expected in the dark. She had set it herself by finding a wall and doing what needed to be done. She had then spent approximately 45 seconds sitting very still and breathing in a way that was not screaming. Then she had kept moving. She found Kestrel at hour 4, which meant she had spent 4 hours moving through 3 kilometers of active hostile territory, injured, alone in the dark, and had located a stranded team that wasn't hers and that nobody had told her was there. She found them because she had seen their sign. Not a signal, nothing deliberate, but the particular stillness of a building that is occupied by disciplined men trying not to be found, which has a quality to it that is different from the stillness of an empty building, and you can only learn to read that difference by having been in enough buildings that wanted to be empty. She had spent the next 6 hours doing her reconnaissance, alone, not because she was asked, not because it was her assigned role, but because the situation required it and she was the most qualified person available to do it, and that was the whole of the decision tree. She had returned with her map. She had spent the following 20 hours managing the movement of 6 men she didn't know through a route she had designed, pausing when she needed to pause, pushing when she could push, making the kind of micro-decisions that don't appear in any after-action report because they happen too fast and too quietly, and nobody is writing them down. She had done it on one functioning shoulder, a bandaged side, and whatever she'd had in her pockets to eat, which, it emerged, was 2 protein bars and a packet of the kind of dried fruit that nobody actually likes, but which exists in every kit because it has a shelf life measured in geological epochs. She had been awake for the entire 31 hours. When Digger heard this part later in the debrief, he had said nothing. He had just looked at the table. Digger had done 2 combat tours in Fallujah and 1 in Helmand, and had been awarded a Silver Star for something that the citation described in careful, bureaucratic language that left out most of what had actually happened. He looked at the table and said nothing. That from Digger was a standing ovation. The exfil took 2 hours. Reyes led. Cole moved second, which was not the standard arrangement but was the correct one, because she knew the route and he did not, and ego is a luxury that gets people killed. He watched her move, the slight compensation in how she carried her left arm, the absolute economy of every step, the way she stopped at corners with a particular quality of stillness that was not hesitation but pure information gathering, a kind of bodily silence that she could switch on like a switch. And he thought, not for the first time, that whatever system had almost not let her do this job was a system that had nearly deprived itself of something it badly needed. He didn't say this. He just watched her and moved when she moved and stopped when she stopped. There were 2 contact points. The first was a patrol that crossed their path at a junction Reyes had timed. She'd clocked the interval, knew they had 4 minutes, moved the group through in 3 and change. The second was a fixed position she'd marked on her wrapper map as 2 intermittent, 2 armed men who occupied a rooftop sometimes and didn't sometimes. She'd timed that too. They were in a window of absence. The group moved below, silent, 12 pairs of boots, finding the quiet spots in the rubble with the care of people who understand exactly what sound costs. Nobody fired. Nobody had to. She brought them out through a gap in the southern wall that opened onto an unpaved track, and the QRF vehicles were 400 meters down that track, and Cole keyed his radio and said, "Packs incoming, 13 total," and the response was immediate and professional and warm in the way that radio voices get warm when the count is higher than expected. Sarkowski, stepping out through the gap into the open air, looked up at the sky, which was doing something orange and unreasonable at the horizon, and exhaled, long and slow. "God Almighty," he said quietly. It wasn't a complaint. In the vehicle, on the way to the fob, Reyes sat next to Cole with her rifle across her knees and her eyes half closed, and her jaw set in the way that means I will not sleep until I am somewhere I have decided is safe. Cole looked at her profile for a moment. Then he looked away. "Your shoulder," he said. "It's fine. It's not fine. It's functional." He didn't argue. Functional was her word for things that were doing their job regardless of how they felt about it. He'd heard her use it about equipment, about weather, about people. He suspected she used it about herself most of all. "Reyes." She opened her eyes fully, looked at him. He held her gaze. There was so much he could have said, could have and didn't, because some things are too large for the vehicle you're sitting in and the hour you're sitting in it, and because she was not a woman who needed him to say things and he was not a man who said them well. "Good work," he said. She looked at him for another second. "You're still late," she said. And then she closed her eyes again.